Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Novogratz, and this is Next with Novo. Guys, everyone, this is Mike Novogratz. It's Next with Novo. Couldn't be happier to have Anatoly Yakovenko. People call you Toly?
Toly's perfect.
From the Ukraine. I like to start, every time I meet someone, I like to start and say, tell me about yourself. Like, you grew up where?
Origin story?
Give us a little back or origin story.
Yeah, born in the USSR, I guess, but grew up in Illinois, Chicago area. So went to high school there, ended up in Illinois, studying computer science, like 99, 2003. My advisor at the time told me that...
Not nearly as exciting as I was hoping for
yeah.
here.
Yeah,
I was hoping for like the Ukraine Revolution and
yeah.
throwing punches and no. When did you migrate? How old were you?
92 or 91. Can't quite remember at this point. But basically right after the wall fell, my family got out.
Computer science guy?
Yeah. Right through the dot-com crash, my advisor told me that computer science might not be a good career choice.
What was your first job out of school?
So I had the startup in college that was doing like voice over IP kind of Grand Central Dispatch thing. When we didn't have any business sense, but it was the same stack as Qualcomm was using for one of their things, and they hired me on the spot. So I went out to San Diego.
California versus Illinois for Ukraine.
I haven't been back to the Ukraine, and I only go to visit my folks during the 2 weeks of the year in Chicago where it's not 100 degrees or 0 degrees.
So when did you first stumble into crypto, and what sucked you in?
I remember when Bitcoin came out, and some of my friends were messing around with it, and I thought, well, I can build a GPU miner, and somebody built that way faster than me. And then I thought maybe I can build an FPGA or an ASIC, and then that happened within a few months later. So I clearly remember there was a company that promised an ASIC for Bitcoin mining, and they built it, but they mined with it for 6 months before they gave it to anyone that pre-ordered. So that really, showed me what crypto's all about. Don't trust anyone.
It is interesting because in some ways there's such beautiful communities that get formed. And there are other ways there is this, dog eat dog, early on. And you still see it. You still see kind of this weird hybrid between the beautiful communities where, the white hats come in and give people their money back, but they're scamsters and fraudsters, and I guess just like in normal society. So your first real job in the space was what?
In crypto? Really Solana. So what really kind of got me into it was 2017, Bitcoin was going bonkers, and a buddy of mine and I started building deep learning hardware that was mining crypto in the background. And that was our first foray into it. And that's when I started thinking about proof of work, why it's necessary, why it's cool, and literally had 2 coffees and a beer and came up with what kind of the initial idea of what became proof of history.
And talk a layman through proof of history versus proof of stake, proof of work, proof of...
Yeah, so proof of work is a way to measure entropy, electricity. You got to burn electricity to solve proof of work. And proof of history is just a way to measure time. So it doesn't take nearly as much energy, but you're forced to spend real time to do it. And that was really kind of like that, mind blown eureka moment. I couldn't sleep for like a week. And it was important because I spent nearly 15 years at Qualcomm. Time division multiple access was the first wireless protocol for cellular networks. Time is like this really core piece of optimizing those things. So once I knew I had that, I was like, okay, so you can now build scalable blockchains. And that really what started it.
You started in 2017, really. Ethereum has blown up at this point. It's trading 800, 900,000. We have all these, what would be, ETH killers being launched at that time from Polkadot and Cosmos, and or at least raising crowdfunding. You didn't crowdfund Solana. When did
Too
you raised the
scared.
first money for Solana?
Basically, April 2018 is when we closed like a 3 million seed round. And that was enough to
Right.
get a bunch of my colleagues from Qualcomm, like principal engineers, to like say, fuck it, I'm going to go build this thing.
So they joined you.
Yeah.
So Solana was the Qualcomm team, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
And your funders were friends and family, crypto people?
No, like Slow Ventures, Foundation Capital, Multicoin Capital.
Oh, so you got classic crypto guys
Yeah,
who got pretty.
Silicon Valley, like crypto people.
Yeah. I was going to call them lucky, but I guess we're all lucky. I mean, anybody who put any chip down between 2018 and now is pretty lucky. Some luckier than others, but yeah,
But
those
it
are
was
pretty good early.
the market was falling, right? Like ETH went from 1100 to like 600 and then down to 300.
And then
Everyone
to
was
80.
terrified. So that was bottom, that was like the start of a 2-year bear market that nobody knew that. Everyone thought it was going to turn around any minute. And we were trying to build this thing as fast as we could because we thought anytime at any moment like the bull market's going to come back. So there was kind of no growth for like solid 2.5 years. And crypto really didn't take off up until, basically when COVID and, Black Swan March 12th, which is actually 3 days before we launched.
Wow.
So we launched straight into the abyss.
So you started, like, Black Swan happened, COVID happened. I remember sitting to my team and I was like, guys, this changes everything. And boom, we're off.
We had basically just gotten the network in some stable form that we thought we could launch. And we had the coinless auction lined up and a bunch of exchanges wanted to list us. We didn't want to stop kind of the train, and there's validators that were already running it, kind of ready to go. So at that moment, it felt like we could have just said, hey, this massive event happened and we need to stop and wait until the markets are better. But internally, I thought that the best time to launch was actually right after a massive crash, because it's unlikely to crash again like that.
Right.
You can never predict the market, right? It's impossible to predict. So if you're right after the cliff, might as well just go for it. And that, in retrospect, the people that came in there during that auction, they got to sit a better price than our last private sale. They were the diehards, right? Who else is going to invest in that time?
What did they buy Solana at that time?
22 cents.
22 cents, people. You could have bought Solana at 22 cents and traded $200. That might be the best trade of the year. Yeah, or 2 years. Yeah, it is. It is the best trade. There's some other good ones, but I don't think any as good as that.
So yeah, and the network really, like, the growth came, I think, right around when we got started working with Serum and FTX. That's really when the world kind of realized that there's something interesting here. And at that time, I thought too, we had this moment, like, I don't know, 3 months, maybe 6 months, when nobody else was going to launch because they're terrified of this like catastrophe, macro catastrophe. So we had time to like build stuff and like get out there and get in front of as many people as we could with a live network while everyone else was still waiting. So all our competitors. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, talk a little bit about the relationship with Sam Bankman-Fried with FTX. Sam is literally becoming a legend in the space.
Yeah,
funny, right? He's the accidental legend.
This was before he ascended to Mount Olympus. Like, he was still a mere mortal at the time. FTX was not as big as it is today. And we had this demo where you smash the keyboard, and every time you press the keyboard, you see a transaction fired to the network, and it's confirmed in like 1.2 seconds at that time. And I was like, hey, look, it's live. It's smart contracts. And look, it's fast. And he was like, okay, cool. Showed it to his engineers, and we noticed that the network was starting to have like a bunch of transactions. I guess people were using it, and it was them like messing around with it. And we had a bunch of calls, and they're like, okay, we wanted to build a exchange, not like Uniswap, like a real exchange, but like what we know works. And this is the first network where we think it's possible. So let's just go build it. And from our perspective, what I really liked about working with Sam was that he didn't care about like the details. There wasn't any like managers or a lot of like deal making. It was just like kind of a handshake over the phone because we couldn't meet, and like, let's go just get everybody together to build this awesome thing, because no one's ever built a central limit order book that was fully unchained before. No one's built that as a mechanism for DeFi. And he's got this like personality that shifts engineering timelines. Stuff that we thought was gonna take months took like weekends.
Wow.
so that was pretty awesome. So, and you know, at that point, his team, I think there's still just 6 engineers behind all of FTX. They built this thing in like 4 weeks and launched it and went live. And we started seeing developers kind of recognize that there's something interesting, something new here, a new set of tools that they didn't have access to on any other chain. And that's really kind of kickstarted the whole ecosystem.
Most investors and most listeners don't really understand the difference between Ethereum and Solana and all the rest. And intuitively, there's this trade-off between speed and security, right? Speed and decentralization, speed and security. Talk a little bit about that and how you guys fit into that, right?
Yeah.
Listen, in the NFL, speed wins. It just always wins in football. And right now, you guys are doing awesome. People are. I talk to developers; they're moving over to your network. But talk about how you think about those trade-offs. And
so Vitalik came up with this thing called the trilemma, where you have performance, security, and decentralization as the 3 triangles, and you kind of optimize for one or the other. And that constraint, that limit, applies to a network that doesn't use more bandwidth than is available to it, right? So as long as, let's say, everybody in the world has 1 gigabit worth of internet, as long as everybody doesn't send or receive more than 1 gigabit, you're within the trilemma. But as soon as you want to do twice as much stuff, right, then you have to split the network and have 2 of them do it independently, and then kind of trust each other, figure out some way to trust that they're not lying to each other. And that's a really hard problem. And this is what Ethereum has been working on for the last 4 or 5 years. And this is ETH2 in their design, but sharding and those systems. But because I spent a decade at Qualcomm, I can tell you that hardware moves really fast. And I started with 2 megabyte flip phones and ended up optimizing augmented reality in a 4 gigabyte, phone in the span of 10 years. So this is, as soon as I saw this problem of scaling blockchain, I immediately looked up at a data sheet of what like a current day computer can do and how much cryptographic operations I can shove through this thing per second. And at that time, 4 years ago, it was about 1 million per second on a modern day server. So I thought, okay, that means that this is competitive with something like NASDAQ, which is doing about 500,000 to 1 million messages per second. And censorship resistance is finance. It's the same thing as getting access to markets. So there's something interesting here for me, right, as a hardware kind of firmware guy. So this is really what I thought everyone else was going to kind of approach the problem the same way, kind of thinking about it. Can we make this a problem for Intel, NVIDIA, and those guys? So we're kind of, abstract ourselves out of the way, build the software so it gets out of the way of the hardware. But I think we're the only team that is really as focused on that particular angle. So the main difference between Ethereum, Polkadot, Avalanche, Cosmos, Near, all these other chains is how they play this game of how one shard or one sub network or parachain trusts another one. And there's a bunch of trade-offs in design, and this is kind of what they've been focusing on. And Solana is one giant network. Everybody does the same work, but we heavily optimize and leverage hardware. So in the span of our development, we went from needing 4 GPU cards to get to 1 million signatures per second to one that can do 7 million per second.
Wow.
And so that kind of like this is what I expected, right? Like the hardware is going to get cheaper, networks, data centers are going to get faster, and I think within a span of 6 years, we're going to be shipping a very boring box that plugs into whatever rack you have at your business, and is like Cisco and then Solana, and it does the blockchain, and you don't really think about it. and it gets faster every 2 years, right? Because these guys are going to make faster chips and bigger chips.
The chip gets faster, right? Yeah. And so it's decentralized because you can have as many different validators.
Yeah, we can have very large numbers. Obviously, there's limits, but on a 1 gigabit network, those limits are in the hundreds of thousands. It's just a matter of, can we make this thing fast enough to process all the events, all the packets, and be able to keep up with the network. So right now, I think it's at about 1,000 plus voting and like 800 RPCs, so close to like 2,000 machines. You can think about it that way.
So last I saw was right before you had a glitch, the first kind of Solana glitch. I have to bet you were cool as a cucumber.
That was not the first one.
All right, the first one since you guys have been famous.
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? What is decentralization? A lot of people talk about it in wishy-washy terms, but I'm an engineer. I look at it, what can I measure about it? So the way we measure it is, how much does it cost to destroy every copy of the state? Because if you do that, then you totally destroy the network. And that's true for Bitcoin. It doesn't matter how much power it has. If I could magically snap my finger and destroy every copy of the Bitcoin ledger, it's gone, right? So that's real decentralization. How much power do I need to spend to destroy it? So right now, there's roughly 2,000 of these independent validators. Some businesses that run RPC nodes, some that vote. So when the network stalls, it runs out of resources to be able to process all the information that people are throwing at it for whatever reason, right? It could be an exploit, it could be a denial of service. You only need one of those to basically restart it, throw away the state that's pending, and then continue from that known point. So it's not a catastrophic event, and it kind of demonstrates what is the whole point of decentralization. Well, if you have many number of these copies and all of these are valid, then when something like this happens, it took our community like 17 hours to get their shit together and continue. They do this on the testnet like once a month, sometimes under 4 hours. This I think they were a little skittish because it's mainnet to like, what happened? Well, let's analyze it, right? So, but it's generally the idea that this decentralization is the final kind of fault tolerance. Like how do these networks work? Well, it's people, and the cryptography allows all these people around the world to quickly come to the right decision and verify that they came to the right decision altogether. And that's kind of the magic of it. So as the network grows, it might get to 10,000 people or 100,000 people running these systems. I still suspect that if some, oh shit event happens, that they can still continue. That's the whole point,
right?
Is being able to give the people the tools to do so.
So let me ask you the question. So, because a lot of people kind of conceptually think they understand blockchains, but okay, so we had 17 hours before you're like, okay, back up and running. Yep. What happens in those 17 hours? Transactions just get backed up?
They just drop, right? There's just nobody to pick them up and put them into blocks. Right. So from an application's perspective, from a user's perspective, it kind of looks like there was 17 hours between blocks. And I made the joke on Twitter that Solana has the fastest block time, 400 milliseconds, and the slowest, 17 hours.
But if you're a business running on top of Solana,
exactly,
you're just like patience, people, patience, people, patience, people.
And that's a serious thing, right? Because the promise of these systems is that they provide absurd reliability, that they never go down, they never get destroyed, they never get hacked. Security is actually easier to build because that's just making sure all the copies are consistent and you can make as many copies as you want. But reliability is a harder problem, especially when you're trying to maximize the performance. You're trying to like make this thing redline all the time without loss, to availability. So that's a challenging problem. But You know, people have built much more complex things, 5G, LTE, all these things serve 4 billion people around the world.
How did your community react? Like when I say your community, so they're the core developers, they're the people that have built on top of it, they're your investors, they're like, what was the broad reaction?
So
Did you get
because we
any hate mail?
no, like so because we've had like our whole start, even to launch, has been the network constantly falling over. The first one was 20 minutes, then 2 hours, then a week, then a month, and then it was running and running under stress tests. And the community is kind of used to it. Like, so we had a lot of internal support, and they just did what they're supposed to do. They ran a bunch of consistency checks, and the way the recovery works is that there isn't some central organization that tells you, okay, everybody recover from this thing. It's that everybody runs a tool against their copy of the state, their ledger, and then they continue. And if everyone agrees on the result, the network continues running. And if 80% don't agree, it's just halted. And then we got to do more work to figure out why. So in that sense, like people just doing what they're supposed to do, and super supportive. You get a lot of flack from like the other tribes, but we take it in stride. We know, we still call it beta for that reason, is that it's complicated building an operating system, a database. It's a 10-year proposition, right? It's like a lifetime of work. And we're 4 years in.
Let's talk about tribes for a second. I'm fascinated with how tribal crypto is. And as I sit as an investor and put bets on lots of tribes and comment on them, I literally sometimes I'm a hero of some ecosystems and I'm a complete foil or villain of others. And I get trolled all the time by certain ecosystems. I mean, 30, 40 times a day. How do you see the future playing out? I mean, we got brilliant people in this space, right? Like you look at what Vitalik and his group are doing at Ethereum, or how do you see the blockchains? Is it going to be a world of coexisting blockchains, or are there going to be some dominant? Like if you were just forecasting.
Well, my hope is that it's kind of, so I grew up kind of as a technologist in the Linux era, 90s. There were literally tribes around Linux file systems. People that got so into the Linux kernel that they would fight each other on the internet because of one file system or another. Or because of one Linux distribution or another. I use Gentoo, and the people that use Gentoo, people thought were annoying because we're all about optimizing the software. And it was just it's funny, but I think it comes from this idea that when you have something kind of magical in your hand, you can't predict how powerful it's going to be. You kind of have, it's almost religious, right? You're holding like an artifact. Is this thing going to be like so cool that it's just going to change everything? And you buy into it, just like people bought into the Apple kind of idea of personal computer, and you become a fan of it, and you like, it becomes part of your culture. So I think that's just a natural thing that happens during any paradigm shifting process. We get enthralled with the idea of like, what could this change about the world? And I hope it doesn't end up like most things where you have like one Android that's 99.99% of all Linuxes is Android. Right. or one, right, like one company that is the personal computer company, like we did with Microsoft. I think that diversity, if we can maintain it, it's just more fun, right? Like you get actually more progress, more competition. And I think there's an opportunity where that's true, because one huge difference around from this generation of builders is that everything is open source by default. Everything is open. It's a very collaborative environment. Even though we argue on Twitter, private or not even privately, but like I love the folks building ETH2. Like we discuss like really hard, challenging problems, like privately, like, hey, how does this work? How did you guys solve this? It's very much an open, collaborative environment. So my hope is that that continues, that we can all still work on cool shit. That would be awesome.
What do your parents think of all this? Do they still have a Ukrainian accent? Anatoly.
Yeah, my God. Yeah. They're yeah, my Russian is now like their broken English, so we're
Yeah.
having trouble communicating because I'm forgetting, right? And they started late. They don't like none of my nobody older than me gets it. That's what I'm finding.
Yeah.
none
No,
of
it's
none of my yeah family
no.
family doesn't understand. My cousins and nieces get it. They're like, oh yeah, I get it. Like I want that NFT. Okay.
Yeah. I always tell people I'm the oldest guy in crypto, but it is really a hard thing to keep up with. And it's really hard to explain to, 60, 70, 80 year olds. They're like, eh? So how's your life changed? Now you've gone from engineer, working at Qualcomm, making a good living to now like, entrepreneur,
Exhausted.
zillion, zillionaire. Have you shifted the way your life lives, or are you still the same guy? You at least
Mostly the
buy
same.
at least buy a nice car.
Got a Tesla Model Y, can fit 7 seats. It's not nothing like exciting yet. I just don't have time. Reality is that like I'm trying to steer a complex technology problem and grow the user base at the same time. It's
Right.
like, early days when the PC market was taking off, and it's just like exhausting but exciting. That's why I'm here.
Right. And your core team is how big?
It's like 70 people altogether, of 32 engineers, half on the core database operating system part and half on the application level.
And the community around it that works on the project, not projects on the project, but on the project itself. How many other people do you think that?
I think that's getting into like a few thousand, peripherally. A lot of core contributors that are working on the application side are not part of Solana. So they're folks out of Serum, out of Star Atlas, out of Phantom, like a bunch of these small teams like Metaplex. Um, they found their little niche with product market fit, and they're iterating, but they're releasing a lot of the changes to the community so people can pick them up and reuse them. So that true open source kind of let's all work together. That's happening, and that to me is like holy shit. That's awesome.
That's awesome. If I had to pick a time, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, when you come back and you're like, whoa, it worked. Are we 3 years away?
um, when we get to 100 million people that use self-custodied keys on these chains for applications, for something, for NFTs, I don't care what it is,
Right.
I think we'll be there. And
Awesome.
that's kind of like that moment in the internet when you had 100 million people browsing and you saw Friendster, Orkut pop up, and you're like, okay, that's the model. Somebody's going to get it right. We're not quite there yet. Like not quite at like it's obvious that this is going to be the thing. So it's exciting because I'm like, well, what is it going to be? Like, I have like my ideas, but there's no way I could predict it.
Awesome. Hey, so anything else you want to say? I always give guests free
Oh
open
man.
mic. You've said a
Okay.
lot.
Yeah. Plug Ignition Hackathon, solana.com/ignition. Our hackathons, we have went from 1,000, 3,000, and 13,000 registrations. Like this one, I think is around 5,000, but way more engineers. So I think we should see hundreds of submissions. So really excited about like what people are building. If you're not an engineer, just jump into Discord and talk to these folks and convince them to quit their jobs at Google and go start a crypto company. This is the best time to do it.
You're all in.
Yeah, I'm all in.
Well, listen, I have enjoyed the heck out of this. I'm proud of you. I think what you guys have done is awesome. Listen, I think you've got, we love the guys at Jump, and I know those guys are partners of yours, and I see what Sam's doing, and so I think you guys have an awesome shot at it. And so we'll be cheering you on and watching, and
Appreciate it.
appreciate all your time.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Guys, that's it for this episode of Next with Novo. A big thanks to Toly. We'll see you next week.